years ago, former world-class motocross racer Monster Mike Schultz experienced a life-altering accident while racing a high-performance snowmobile in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. The crash had caused his knee to hyperextend, resulting in a compound fracture that severed the main artery supplying blood to his lower leg. 3 days later, the massive trauma would lead to amputating Mike's left leg just above the knee. Within months of that surgery, Mike was back on a snowmobile with a prosthetic leg that he had designed and built himself in his garage. And over the next decade and a half, Mike would go on to become a world-class Paralympic athlete, winning a host of gold and silver medals along the way. Monster Mike indeed. Thank you so much for joining us today. And also thank you to Dan Snetzelar, Product Sales Leader for CNC Machining at Protolabs, for joining us as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here. I love talking shop.
That's fantastic. What an inspiring story. So it might seem obvious, but the first question I have for you, Mike, is how does one go from experiencing such a life-changing accident to designing their own prosthetic? Do you have an engineering background? How did that happen?
My engineering background is just experience in my shop. From a young age, I was always really intrigued on how things worked. Pulled things apart, put them back together. Sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't, but I learned a lot through that whole process. And when my injury happened, it was a gut punch for sure. Like, being at the top of my professional racing career, and then the doctors saying, I'm going to become an amputee, was quite difficult to say the least. And, I knew that I'd still be interested in riding recreationally, dirt bikes and snowmobiles. Well, actually, the dirt bikes was a big question mark because I wasn't sure if my balance would work well enough to ride moto again. But the first time I got back on the snowmobile was more or less just to get outside and get some fresh air and get a smile on my face. And honestly, that was about 4 weeks after the amputation happened. And that was before my prosthesis. My wife, Sarah, she was off at work, and I snuck outside and I fired up my snowmobile and went for a ride just to get outside. I realized that, yeah, this is something that's so deep in my blood, whether it be dirt bikes or snowmobiles, that, I'll figure out a way. Over the course of the next couple months, did a lot of research on prosthetics and what was available, and there's just not many options for high impact sports. There's a lot of options for everyday use, walking, jogging, some running, but not equipment that would take the beating of, riding rough terrain.
Sure. I ran into Chloe Villaro over at Protolabs. She was giving me a little booth tour when I was at IME West back in February. And she showed me the model of your prosthetic. And I thought, man, I really got to talk to this guy. So I'm really glad that I have the opportunity to do so. She showed me that there was a portion of that particular model that Protolabs help create. So can you tell me a little bit about how you, Mike, got together with Protolabs and Dan, and how that relationship kind of began? Because I don't know what you would have used in your garage to make the components, but I'm sure it's evolved quite a bit since then.
Yeah, to say the least. The original prototype, 2009, used my high school drafting experience, education, to blueprint the parts. And honestly, I was really good in the shop with fabrication, cutting, welding, grinding, that kind of thing, but I had never ran machines. And so some friends of mine here in Minnesota, part of my racing community at Fox Shocks, they actually taught me the basics of turning and milling for my very first prototype. And that was in April 2009. From that first prototype, realized that, okay, I need, more sophisticated parts, and eventually started talking with a machine shop locally in Brainerd at the time. And it kind of started to open my eyes of what was possible. That first prototype, I raced on it a couple times, and then 7 months after my injury happened, I was on my second generation of prototype and actually was racing Supercross in LA at the X Games, 7 months out, which was an incredible timeline. And through that, realized that so many other amputees could use equipment that I was working on. And so I decided to start Biodapt in 2010 and needed to go into production. And that's when, so many things were coming at me as far as different manufacturing processes. And, for the first couple of years, worked with real small shops. And then, kind of fast forward to a whole lot of, new things, new parts, new designs. I think it's been a couple of years ago now that I was just searching for rapid prototyping options and came up with Proto Labs. And that's what kind of opened that door. And yeah, totally blew my mind, the capabilities of the rapid prototyping process, being able to drop in 3D files and then, within a day or days, you could have parts back in your hands to test out. So, that's how, Proto Labs really came in the picture with us. I think it's actually been about 4 years now. Man, time's flying.
So you had created the CAD file yourself that they would then, so you uploaded that to their website and then a prototype was built, or?
Yeah, so I mean, over the years, we've done several different models and generations of equipment, but yeah, for the last 4 or 5 years, I've had an engineering student working with me who's he's a whiz with SolidWorks, and it's a lot of fun to bounce the ideas back and forth, and he can generate these amazing 3D models. And with that, yeah, we just drop them into the website, and we can get quotes back within a couple hours and decide whether the part makes sense to prototype yet or not. And it's really helped us fast track the testing and prototyping phases of our products. And we've done CNC machining as well as additive manufacturing. We just recently got a 3D printed stainless steel part for one of my personal leg setups for snowboarding. So the options are kind of unlimited with as long as you got the designs and models to drop in.
Is your main customer the high performance athlete, or can you produce prosthetics for everybody?
Well, ours are aimed at action sport activities, and it's from recreational users to like the most elite professional athletes out there. That's what's so cool about it is our designs are made so there's a lot of adjustability to them, depending on the performance level of the person or the activity. So our VersaFoot and our Moto Knee can be fine-tuned depending on the sport and activity and the level at what the user's using it.
So can you show me, I know you had grabbed some visual aids for me.
Yeah, so this is the Moto Knee right here, which is a modular device, and the industry uses common adapters to connect like the knee to the top of the foot. These are titanium, which is pretty trick. And then the foot can be used by above knee or below knee amputees. So you kind of put it together like Legos or an erector set. So this side frame right here is actually one done by Proto Labs. And we work with a couple different manufacturers for higher production, but Proto Labs we use when on this one, for example, we were playing with different rates, angles in this slot here. And so over the years, I'm trying to really get the most out of my snowboarding leg. So we're playing with different profiles, which makes the resistance feel either more or less progressive through the range of motion. Like on this set of knee frames here, I did 2 sets. And, imagine getting a machine shop, a traditional machine shop to make, 2 parts for you. I mean, it's just, well, most of them won't even talk about it. They're like, no, we need 100 or more. So working with Proto Labs, we can just drop the files in and make 1 or 2 parts. And yeah, of course, there's some expense there, but in the big picture, to have that part within a couple days is extremely valuable.
Definitely.
And then we've also been playing with a new knee system, which is called the Action Knee, and we're in our initial production runs right now. And so, making 5 sets of parts or whatever just for testing. I believe that's probably one that you saw on display at the show. So it's quite a bit smaller than this, lighter weight, a little more simple design.
How do you see the future of prosthetic equipment for athletes evolving? Because it seems like it has already evolved incredibly. And then what role does your company and by extension then Proto Labs play in this evolution?
Yeah, I mean, from 2009 to where we are right now, not only with what we've done here at Biodap, but prosthetics in general, have evolved incredibly. Like the first leg system that I learned to walk on was a mechanical hinge. And now I'm on a $120,000 microprocessor knee system that I don't have to think about walking at all. It just does what it's supposed to. It doesn't let me trip unless I'm really not paying attention. But, it's allows me to move through my day like very natural. And I think, for me, my perspective, the future of prosthetics is being able to join what this does and what my everyday leg does, and kind of do it all instead of having to change equipment all the time. That's the ultimate goal in my mind, and being able to perform as close as possible to normal is also the goal.